genetic pattern that's been passed down through to that grandchild. Now, of course, if you're breeding budgies, the answer is to try and get a dominant pattern of something you like to breed into them, to keep them going for year on year on year on. Now, it takes a bit of doing and it takes a bit of understanding, but I think it is possible to gradually eradicate the birds that you don't want. Not so much the flecking, because flecking can be a bit of a nuisance. They can suddenly reappear all of a sudden. But I think also, if you go to the top people, Ludov, for instance, he wouldn't use that one, but he would use a bird that has got flecking in it if he thought it was the right mate for the hen who wanted to pair it. But as I say, you're playing with a genetic pool all the time, and you've got to try and make your own decisions. But I think you can build the stuff that way around. It takes a bit of time. You know, if you were starting with that one, that'd take you some time to get up to something more like that. You ain't going to do it overnight. It's going to take you a long time to get from there to there, and still have a bird in that condition. It'll take you quite a few years. That's what the hobby used to be about when we all started. Nobody started off with what I call the superior birds years ago, because we were all penniless. We started off with very ordinary birds, and we gradually built them up with. Now, that's flecked. That's not flecked. Now, the idea was that if that was flecked, that couldn't beat that. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that's probably a better quality budgie than that is. But unfortunately, there were some wonderful budgies down south that decided they would overall the BS. And instead of putting that first, putting that second, which is what the directive was, they decided they would put that second, make that third, and not have a first prize winner, which made a complete mockery of what the Budgerigar Society really wanted to achieve. But as I say, I think flecking ruins the birds personally. If they were made to have flecks like that, they'd have been like it from the start. I just think it's a thing that spoils it. Another thing, if you look at these more closely, is that you'll find that quite a few have a degree of opalescence to them. Now that also is something which is not wanted, but I don't find that quite a fact. I don't make any mistake. Once again, he's up there, you could detect opalescence. He would penalise them like mad if they got opalescence. I didn't subscribe to that theory, I was more lenient in that way. There's I think a little bit of blue coming through where it should be. It's not that bad a thing to worry about. Did I even answer your question or not? Or did I go off on a tangent? You can't remember what the question was.
Sorry, we're anyway. Have you ever come? Yes, I got it wrong. Which is lovely. There is, you don't have to award if you feel that the variety is very different if you are not enough sufficient quality to we're talking about a CC withhold the CC.
You can withhold challenge certificates. You do it at your own peril. I think you do it. But it has been done. Some clever lads from the Midlands went up to Scotland one day and hardly gave us a challenge certificate at all. It's caused an awful story up in Scotland. I think you have to be told, when you see a lot of these varieties, specialist varieties, such as recessive pines, clear wings and so forth, you could easily say they fall short of the specification. But I think providing they appear to be of that variety, you have to be a little bit tolerant. truth of the matter is nowadays the quality in nearly every colour is quite high. There is always some quality birds there, even if they're not very well marked. And I think you have to reward that and put those forward. So I've never been brave enough to say, don't reward as challenges. But once again, I like to think of the fanciers who brought in anticipation. And I like to think they're being rewarded. If we've got people coming to Swindon from South Coast, from the Midlands, from East Anglia or things like that, we want to, you know, I think it's wrong for us, for the judge to say, take it away, you know, because next year it won't come. But you've got to encourage people. And I think to that, you have to have really extenuating circumstances not to award the challenge to. Many years ago, the worst class to judge at most shows, especially Cambridge shows, was the opening leaves. Because you had an awful lot of very poor birds, all flecked-headed, with flights missing and so forth. And it was awful to try and judge the class of birds like that. So you can only make the best effort. You have to sort of alight on something which you think is right and stick with that as your principle for the day. It's easy to judge a class of birds of your own when you've been able to pick them out of flight. Think, I'll take that one for that reason, I'll take that one for that reason, I'll take that one for that reason. When you've got 7 different people who brought you 7 different birds, all of which have got different flights, it's a slightly different problem that you're presented with. Because A, you're not pre-warned, you're not sorting your mind out of what you're going to do. You've got to make up your mind in that 2 or 3 minutes that you've got to judge it. And it's at that point, if you've got a bit of a system in your head, that you'd probably stand yourself in good stead. And as I said, my tailless wonders, flecked-headed birds, push them out the way straight away. There are helpers sometimes in some shows because you often in a class of 7 you can get rid of 3 just like that. And they may be the best 3 birds according to their owners and maybe some other people in the class. But if they've got flecks and they've got no tails and so forth, you've got your opinion, and your opinion carries on that day. And that's as simple as that. I decided this was a class I would lead cinnamons. Was I right? Yeah?
You know, it's sat there, manager. I think. This afternoon. We better sell
Now, I was thinking along the lines that I've just been talking about when I started off judging this class. So, I immediately put this one down because it's flecked. Anybody who put number 2 first in that class got that wrong. And then, on quality, relegated that one down to there. And I've got them, I think something like this. And then I started looking at the condition of them. And I thought, that's the best condition of the lot. I'll move that up to first. Stands well. It's in good condition. A lot of them have got full tails and things like that. So I ended up with them like that. And if anybody else ended up with them like that, they bloody lucky.
Would you say that the flat-headed bird is the best in like feather condition out of all three? Would you say he is the best conditioned bird? As in being clean with like, no, I know he's flecked. Would
From
you
a
say,
feather condition, yeah, if you're going to criticise it, if you start getting almost nitpicking, you would say that it's only got one tail feather, Tom. But, you know, to my mind, one or two tail feathers don't really worry me. The other thing that doesn't worry me is all this trouble over what they call long tail and so forth. You know, if a judge can't decide that the bird with a long tail is out of proportion and therefore should be barked down accordingly, then they're poor judges. Why they've got to be told a directive that you have to knock long tails out and so forth, I think it's totally wrong. I think you use your own brain to make it. You know, like they still allow you to use your brain on the flecked-headed. There's a lot of people, I've got one or two very good mates who would put that first regardless, because they like that one best. So they would put that first, and whether it's flecked or not, that's their opinion. They're allowed to do that if they want to. But I always found that if you started putting these things near the front or first, you ended up then when you're doing your CC like that with a lot of flecked-headed birds. And I think that is a fatal error. I like to eradicate them early so that when I've got the CC, they may not be the best set of birds, but they are a set of birds that all qualify to win, rather than birds that don't qualify to win. Yes, you're probably right, that's in a good condition. That's the next best condition. These two are a bit, well, as you can see, you know, I now understand Bob's brought them, he's caught them like, well, sort of cattle for an afternoon meeting, on 4 in a cage, taken for a judging competition. You know, he hasn't bothered to prepare them in any way. But I can understand that for this competition, but if this was a proper show, anybody who sends a bird out like that deserves to be relegated because they haven't bothered to make any effort. You know, you can easily clean up something like in the middle of the head of that bird if you seriously intended showing that bird to try and win a class. So that's the way they ended up. So I'm glad you're doing this. I'm attacked altogether. And I stood there with Terry holding me, glaring at me. And I thought, do I go with best budget or do I go use condition as being the ultimate thing? Now, if you use condition as being the ultimate thing, you'd end up with a bird that eventually put last as first. And I thought, if I put that first, I don't think everybody's probably going to agree with me. So I started looking at them from a different angle. And I thought, well, which one do I like the best? Which one, in my opinion, is closest to the ideal budgerigar? So I thought we'll start and decide that that one is the worst one in the class. We'll put that last as a budgie. Best condition, worst budgie. Then I go there. This one at that point you can see, it's across the perch now. Looks a different bird altogether. Well, when I was judging him, he dropped his tail at the time. I think he does when he sits on one perch. He's not going to sit on one perch, you know, he did when he was done that. In reasonably good condition, probably the second best condition bird in the class. The drop tail, his tail, takes away the deportment and the appearance of the bird completely. And whilst it's showing the drop tail or hinge tail, It doesn't look like a proper show budget. In fact, show budget should have a straight back line, but those with a slightly higher back line always would show a bit more swank. Our Roy Stringer used to draw them in his cartoons, a little bit of swank in them. He's not doing this so much now, but he certainly did when we were over there. So if you'd have been stood behind me at the time and said, why are you putting that one down? I'd say drop tail. I do not like that one for a drop tail. Two of these, when I first looked at them, and they still have, looked as though they'd been sick. I don't think they have been sick, but they've got lucky marks. So they've probably been eating something that they like and it's no good to their feathers. But they looked as though they'd been sick. And I thought to myself, well, I quite like them. Well, certainly this one. But they've also a shortage of tail feathers. So I'm starting to judge almost then on pure quality. Like, in other words, I'm throwing some of my ground rules out the window. This one to me was definitely the best budgie. You could say, okay, it's got a tail feather missing at this moment in time, but the chances are that if it's got one, it grows two. The chances are if it's got none, it never grows them at all. Tail feather missing is a temporary fault, not a permanent fault. It's something which hopefully will grow again one day and it'll have two tail feathers. Not a permanent fault. This one looked just that bit rougher because it looks as though it had more whatever it liked than that one. I still think this is better posture, better stance of bird. Not the biggest bird, because you can always tell the height, how good a bird is by where the eye is in relation to the cage. The eye's up there somewhere, like that, indicates that it's quite a good bird. If the eye's down here somewhere, you know it's nowhere near as good. So, having deliberated around there and thought, am I doing this right, am I doing it wrong? No, I'm going to stick with what I consider the best budgie, which is in pretty good condition. Not the best condition, but pretty good condition. These two, I've judged their marks as being like more a temporary fault, not permanent fault, because they do look a bit untidy and mucky. They're two better quality birds than those two, in my opinion. So I suppose in some ways I threw my base criteria out of the window a little bit. But having judged them one way round, I moved the tail, I moved them round, and I came back to this idea. So in this case, everybody got number 3, and I would hope that the great majority of you got number 3 in this. This bird has a lovely top end to it, a far better superior top end to it than any of the others. And the fact of life is that 99% of judges look at that end before they look at anything else. And for that reason, it's a bird that stands off the perch. It's a bird that thinks it's important, that shows itself to be important, and therefore, to my mind, is a standout bird. If he was in absolutely perfect condition, yeah, absolutely, you know, he would be miles in front of the others. You can knock him just about on condition, but not enough to warrant him falling below our best condition birds. So no, putting on, giving it 100 points that you're allowed to allocate for a bird, this one is going to definitely beat the one at the bottom. How many out of 100 it should get is a very interesting point. Because now we judge to one standard with a budgerigar. Years ago, when we used to judge to different standards for different varieties, it would have made a lot of difference. And nowadays, you judge to the one budgerigar, and therefore it's got to be about twice as big as the show cage, and the head on it on a great big bucket, and so on and so forth. So I don't know how many we would give that out of 100 if we were trying to point it. giving points is always interesting. You ought to try that as a meeting one day. It's to get everybody to give, you know, don't have too many birds, but just get people to come along and actually put the points on it. We've done it in the past at various clubs. We may have done it at Swindon at one point in time, when you have 40 points for Lutinos on colour or something like that. And it's interesting to see how people point. How somebody will say, well, that's a 40. But somebody else will say, well, that same bird is only a 20. It's different people use the standard, the range in different ways. And if you've got a colour standard of 40, I think you should use it from 0 to 40, not from 35 to 40, which is the way they do everything. Everything in Europe is judged on right at the top end. You don't give birds nothing sort of thing if that's poor. You still give them 85 or something like that, which I find a bit rather odd. Certainly with Lutinos, the degree of colour in Lutinos can vary tremendously. And the same when you get to other varieties, the variety content is important. It's one of dear old Maurice Roberts' favourite thing, variety content. Now, when I got to this class, I realised that the birds were here just purely for the judging class. And none of them had been spotted out, so I assume that probably somebody had brought these birds along just to make a part of the tour. Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, no.
Didn't have time.
But pardon?
Didn't have time to spot them.
But if you want to take a bird home, you take this one here, because that is the one that everybody's looking for. It's the one with the big wide head, it's flecked, it hasn't got a tail. bit like the cohort one that I brought along, but slightly better actually. But more than slightly better probably. But is it any good to anybody? This is the question. It carries several really what I call bad faults. A, it's flecked. So I would imagine it has got a tail problem, although it's got a reasonable set. No, it ain't got a full set of flights on this side. But it's got an awful lot of what everybody's trying to put into their ideal budget. But having got that, there's an awful lot of work to be put in to getting it right. And it may take longer to get that right than one of these other little fellas that we've had before. Because although you've got the width of head, if you keep getting that flecked headed, flecking and so forth, you're not going anywhere. And if you've got no tails and no wings on them, they're not going very far either. I'm not sure that we got it right with this width of head now, because I think the density of feather in the top of the head is nice, and a bird like this one hasn't got density of feather. It's got lots of long, thin feathers. It hasn't got a good, thick head of hair sort of thing. In fact, it's pretty well represented here today, isn't it?
An old bird, isn't it? But if we could breed a youngster like that with a full tail, full set of flights, no flecking, then yeah, we're going somewhere. But it's not. So by this time I thought, well, this class hasn't really been prepared. I've been sort of using self-orientations in some ways. I thought, that represents all that I dislike. I've got no hesitation in putting that down the bottom. When I was, whilst I was chairman of the BS, it may not have been, but around about that time, we had a chap from Spain who wrote to us about birds, and he said how he absolutely abhorred this type of bird, but if we knew anybody had got them, could we put them in touch with him? Yeah. It's that sort of thing. It's something you don't want,
but you do want, because it's where you're trying to get to a bit, or you're not trying to get to there, but you're trying to get the ideal budget and like that. So anyway, I felt that I could quite easily put that one down the bottom. I then started looking under the quality. This one's in reasonable condition. It's got, if you're looking at sort of standard faults that show on it quickly, is that it tends to cross its wings a bit. It's probably a bit shallow in the mast. It's in pretty good feather otherwise. There would be a good reason not to spot that one out at the moment, because if you tried to spot it out, you wouldn't find a full set of spots. There's some missing. So I don't think you'd find a full set of spots in it at the moment, that one. This was the one I wasn't too certain of, because it was the only hen in the class.
What are you saying?
There was a hen bird, I liked it. And I thought, what do I do with it? It's short in the tail at the moment, so looking at proportions, you criticise it that way. But once again, it's a nice hen bird. And then I've got the two cocks, which I thought were quite slightly superior to the hen bird anyway. And like all good show birds when they stand up. Now, that could have been spotted out, that could have been spotted out, and that would have been through there a bit. This bird is a little bit thicker set, a little bit browier, wider in the either side of the steer, which is what I like. Got a pretty good shoulder line, and for that reason, although it's not spotted out, I thought to myself, well, I've got a real mixed bag here for best in show. I just like the configuration of that bird best, so I ended up with that one as best in show as well. So anybody who got number 3 in class 2, that's the way we judge them too. We judge them class 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, that way around. But that's the bird we ended up with. It's been the best, I think. That's right, Terry?
Yes, nobody got best in show.
Nobody got it?
No.
No, they all went for the other one. No, the winner of class.
Even the ones that got it as the winner in the class didn't put it best in show.
Is that me?
No. No. So what does that say about me?
What's your favourite bird you've ever judged?
What, today?
No.
Ever?
Ever.
Ever?
Yes.
The best budget, given the time,
Yes.
that I've ever seen, and you've got to bear in mind that everything keeps evolving, so things do keep changing. But the bird that left the lasting impression on me failed to win the club show, and only ended up as best champion any age, or best any age in show. It was a cinnamon dark green exhibited by Jeff Bowler. The bird that won it that year was a cobalt shown by the novices, whose name escapes me. They weren't in the fancy.
Richmond.
Huh?
Richmond.
Richmond's in dead right name, yeah. Richmond's won the show that year with a cobalt cock, which had bred out of birds, I believe, that Frankie Punchard had probably let them have. Because they were part of the Midland Mafia at that time. The Richmonds were, they were in with Bowleys and Punchards and Braces and all the other people that were around the Midlands at that time. But that was as good a bird as I've ever seen. At the same time, we had a cinnamon grey, which was a slightly different configuration. And that was a very good bird as well that Jeff had at the time. But that was a bird that always sticks in my memory, that as a bird that I thought should be on the club show. but didn't win the club show. You can go anywhere and see good birds. You can go to everybody's aviary and you can see but relatively good birds, in my opinion. The quality of the birds nowadays is vastly different to the birds that when I started. My little blue one that I was putting up for being in good condition would have been quite a good budgie in 1956, probably a best in show winner sort of thing in 1956. Well, we've moved on so far from then. If we had a little show at Oxford last week. We had the Right Honourable Peter Smith judging them, and he
eventually.
when he got there, yeah, but that's another story. Anyway, he judged them, and he judged them to his own standard, and I would criticise his standard. He did the job. But the birds there were generally of quite a high standard for a cage bird show. There were some really, really nice birds there. And you think to yourself, well, you know, the birds that were there would have done well at our Swindon show. They might not necessarily have won the sea cities, but they've been, a lot of them have been quite close. And people like Neville East, who's won quite a few CCs over the years, but never really hit the top spots, still has a very good standard over there. Even Bob Cave's got some good ones. And funnily enough, Terry Young, and I hear so much about Terry from his brother, Roy, who's part of our Cage Bird Society, Roy is. But when I looked at what some of the birds that Terry brought, I thought, well, they're very nice birds. They're not rubbish birds. They're birds that are well worth breeding on with and trying to do something with. And when it's through all the people that show there, they were all Richardson and so forth, they'd all got some very useful birds on the bench. They weren't of the quality of Daniel Luton. No. But there again, you're talking a different animal there with Daniel. Or maybe even of Arthur Piper or people like that. But they were still of quite high quality. And I think we forget that. You tend to judge everybody by the man at the very top. And that's not the way you should go. I think you have to think about all the other people that make up the fancy. And for their different reasons, they haven't quite gone as far as Lutov. Lutov is an out-and-out pro. He really is. You know, he lives and he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows what he's trying to do. Very, very, very intelligent as far as breeding budgets is concerned. Whether he's intelligent as far as anything else is concerned, I don't know. But when you visit him, it's quite an experience to see the way his birds are kept and what he knows about them and how he treats them. You know, how many of you could take your best bird, have a cage there with a purse on a tee, one of these show cages, put it in there, and walk away and talking, and know that bird is still standing there. I know where mine would be. Mine would be through that, trying to get through that window. It'd be gone. His birds are that steady and well balanced, but they just stand there on that pillow. You sit there, and that's where they basically belong. So that's what I call a professional. He obviously has spent a lot of time. And you can pick anyone on man the flight. But he said, go and pick a few out. Let's go and pick a few out. He probably wouldn't say that to everybody, but he did. I've never bought one because I just couldn't afford it. But I'm not saying I couldn't afford it. I didn't want to afford it. I'll put it that way. But wonderful birds, bird after bird, and birds like our friend that we just had up, that put the tails and so forth, all the flights, everything there. So he obviously does something. He obviously puts a bit of 3-in-1 oil on them or something that makes the tails come through. He does something that is slightly different to. But he really is, as I said, an pro. And he showed me how he likes to pair them up. and things like that, we need to do that. But he was not afraid to use fleck-headed birds, working on a percentage basis. That some will come out with fleck, and some won't. He apparently used fleck hens, so from what I could see, if he was going to use flecking rather than cocks, which was interesting. But yeah, wonderful set of birds of all colours. But we've got other people in this country, and because the show season is closed, or the show scene is closed down in this last 12 months, you don't see quite what's happening. The only place I've been of late is down at my mate, Piper, and he has spread some wonderful stuff again. But he's not been able to put it out on the show now. I think the only problem with somebody like Arthur is I think he has got some of the best birds in the country, but because he lives down in Cornwall, he only ever shows them down in Cornwall. Maybe he wouldn't do quite as well if he was showing in the Midlands or the North or somewhere. I still think he'd do very well, but maybe he wouldn't do quite as well as he's done down there. And there are one or two other chaps down there now who are putting together some nice bird, sets of birds as well, down in the West Country. But everything's a matter of opinion eventually, whether you like it or whether you don't like it. But we're all looking for that bird, more like the yellow face that we had, golden face, whatever it was that we had up a little while ago. Something with that extra bit of feather on it. When we put in the extra feather on, we've also created a lot of other problems. There is no doubt about that. And whether we will ever get it so that we can breed them all like that with no feather problems, I doubt it. I still think we will always have feather problems. And the interesting thing is you can have two very ordinary birds who will produce birds like that because of their genetic makeup. If they got the right family trees, they come together and it just hits. You can certainly produce a bird which is vastly superior to the parents, but invariably if it is vastly superior, you'll find it's got that problem of no flights, no tail. Well, that's been my experience on it. Different people have different experiences, I'm sure. But it's never been easy. Even when I started, you didn't breed hundreds of budgies.